Hey, welcome everybody to Hope for Our Times. It's Tuesday afternoon here on the west coast of the United States, and I see people are watching all the way from New Zealand and man, from everywhere. This is going to be terrific, and you already know who my guest is today, so please welcome Dr. Andy Woods. Great to see you, Andy.
Hey, Tom, thanks for having me.
This is wonderful. And you're going to be at the conference next week with us in Huntington Beach, too. So really looking forward to that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it also.
It's going to be good. I don't remember. I remember talking with you about speaking on a couple of topics because I was with you at a couple of different conferences. And you want to know something? I can't remember what they were. All I remember is at the conferences, I was going, man, this is great. Both times, both messages, the two different conferences, I said, Andy needs to speak on these things at my conference, but I didn't write them down.
Well, the thing I remember is I did my thing on the kingdom, tracing the millennial kingdom, what the millennial kingdom is going to be like. You asked me to speak on it in August, and I said, of course,
Great.
Yeah.
Do you remember what the other one was?
Well, I did one on replacement theology.
That could have been it. I do remember the Millennial Kingdom now. That'll be fantastic. I can't wait to hear it again.
Twice. You got me speaking twice. Is that right?
I have you speaking twice.
Okay, good. That's good to know.
I can't wait. You'll be speaking both Friday and Saturday, and you should be getting the speaker schedule within the next 24 hours from Hillary. And listen, everybody, that you can still go and you can live stream. You can register for live stream. It's only $14.99. We're able to keep the cost down as low as we possibly could. It's available 24/7 for 30 days, so you don't have to watch it live. And Andy, I don't think I told you this. I told Billy and Brandon both that it's uncensored, so you can talk about anything you want. Some of those things that I know you want to talk about, you can. It's not going to be on YouTube or Facebook, so you can go for it. Anything you want to talk about.
Well, with that being said, maybe my second talk should be on the days of Noah.
That would be great.
Okay. Well, I'll plan on doing the kingdom and then the days of Noah.
Oh, it's going to be good. I can't wait. Now I'm really excited.
Okay.
I'm so glad you're going to be with us. And thanks for taking your time out to be here today with us right now. So I titled this The End of Damascus for our conversation today, because we're going to be talking about that. What does the Bible say? What do you believe? I know what different interpretations are, or I would even say theories. But I want to ask you about Ezekiel 38 and 39, because you have a little bit different take on that than what most people have on the timing of it. And if we have time, we'll get into the Nephilim and the Abraham Accords. So there's a lot here, because we also take live questions. Okay. So you ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So coming up, Ezekiel 30. Well, let's start with this. We'll get back to that. Let's start with Psalm 83. Okay. You have your YouTube that you do, the Middle East Meltdown. And you're going to be addressing this in more detail coming up this Sunday, I believe, regarding Elam, Damascus, and Psalm 83 war. What's your take on that? The destruction of Damascus, Isaiah chapter 17, Psalm 83 war, and also the prophecy of Elam in the book of, I believe it's Jeremiah. What's your thoughts?
Well, they're kind of boring. I mean, I'm a big prophecy guy, as you know, but I think the action is in Ezekiel 38 and 39. I think all of those other prophecies you mentioned have already happened. And I know there's a big move today to have these kind of first prophecies or next prophecies or now prophecies, but I sort of see them as a distraction from the real action, where God is setting the stage for Ezekiel 38 and 39. Mark Hitchcock wrote a book called Showdown with Iran. And in that book, there's Appendix 1 and Appendix 2. And at the very end, he does the best job I've ever seen of explaining, why those prophecies are not futuristic prophecies, but, actually historically happened. For example, with the Elam prophecies, and I agree that Elam equals Persia, which if it was a futuristic prophecy would equal modern day Iran, but it keeps saying Nebuchadnezzar, over and over again in that section. So that's a prophecy that was fulfilled back in the 6th century. And when you go over to Damascus, I know this is very disappointing for people because all of these are all friends of ours, so there's no ill will, but a lot of our colleagues in prophecy have taught for a long time that Israel is going to take out Damascus, because the big three, Iran, Russia, and Turkey, are in Damascus. So they have this scenario where Israel is going to take out Damascus of Syria, and that's going to light the fuse, they keep saying, which is going to ignite the Gog Magog war. And how do they, I agree with them that the Gog Magog war is looming, but how do they know that Israel is going to take out Damascus first? Well, the whole thing comes from Isaiah 17, verses 1 and 2, where it says, Damascus is going to be made a ruinous heap. And the problem is that prophecy was fulfilled already by the Assyrians in 732 BC. And so it doesn't say there that Damascus is going to be destroyed forever. The Hebrew word olam, is not used there like it is for Babylon. In Jeremiah 51, verse 26, it says Babylon is going to be destroyed forever. Well, that obviously has never happened. So there must be a future destruction of Babylon, but you don't find that in Isaiah 17. All it says is Damascus is going to be made a ruinous heap, not forever, but it's just going to be made a ruinous heap. And you can document that by what Tiglath-Pileser of the Assyrians did to Damascus in 732 BC. And so that's, Damascus is destroyed. It doesn't say it'll never be rebuilt. Saul of Tarsus was from, Damascus. He had a ministry there he was converted on the Damascus Road, Acts chapter 9. So I'm not seeing Damascus as some sort of futuristic prophecy. It's something that's already happened. And by the way, when you get into that Damascus prophecy in Isaiah 17, verse 4, it says Israel will fade. And it says Ephraim, which is, I think, a synonym for the northern kingdom, will fade. Well, that can't be a futuristic prophecy because in the end times, Israel's going to be restored. So you just look at all of these details, and I think Damascus already happened. I think the Elam prophecies of Jeremiah already happened. And then that leaves the Psalm 83 war.
Well, hold on one second before
Sure.
Psalm 83. I do want to say this. So, because a lot of my viewers right now are saying, well, I've heard Tom teach on the destruction of Damascus, and I have. I've taught that many times as being a futuristic prophecy. And one of the things that I love doing on this program is having people on that I don't agree with. And in fact, you have a couple of different things on here that we're going to get to in a minute. And I find it fascinating, pointing out that with chapter 17, verse 4, Ephraim will fade. Well, that did happen. You're right. That happened. You look at the Assyrian invasion, and you start seeing what's happened to that. But in the last days, Israel's not going to be fading. Israel's going to be, the Messiah is going to come back. He's going to rule and reign from Jerusalem. There's going to be the tribes of Jacob. All of them are going to be there. Mm-hmm. So that's great. And I do like being challenged with my thinking too. And now you've got me also wanting to read the back of Mark Hitchcock's book. I haven't read the appendixes before. I'm going to read them. So thank you.
Yeah, I think that's really what it's all about. It's iron sharpens iron. And as I've said before, that's what it was silent in heaven for a half hour. That's when we...
Yeah, I've heard...
that's when we all readjust our charts, right? Because no one's going to have it exactly correct.
That's great. When it comes to these subjects, I haven't met anybody that has agreed 100% on it, on everything. And as we get closer and closer to the second coming of Christ, there's going to be a better and better understanding. I believe also the words of Daniel apply to those who are especially living during the tribulation period, where these prophecies are going to be revealed. Shut up and close the book and seal them up until the time of the end. And I do think that as we are going down this road, things are becoming more and more clear. I believe for me and a lot of our colleagues, if they're willing to say, hey, maybe I was wrong on that in the past. Okay, Psalm 83. I know Bill Salas is a good friend of mine. You know Bill. He's written the Psalm 83 book. I've interviewed him a few times. I've done some documentaries with him. But with Psalm 83, so he says it's coming in the future. But you say not so fast.
Well, backtracking just for a minute, let me just say one more thing about Elam and Damascus. I'm not saying that Damascus is prophetically insignificant. It obviously is very significant prophetically because Russia, Turkey, and Iran are in Damascus as we speak. But it's significant as stage setting for Ezekiel 38 and 39. That's what makes it a big deal. It's not prophetically significant because Isaiah 17 is about to be fulfilled. And, Elam or Persia or Iran is prophetically significant. But it's not prophetically significant because of Jeremiah's prophecies. It's significant because of Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39, because Persia, joins Russia in invading Israel. So I agree with everybody that we ought to keep our eyes on all of those parts of the world. But I think we need to be very, very careful about developing scenarios like Israel is going to hit Damascus first, and that's the fuse which will ignite the Gog Magog war. Getting up in front of audiences and teaching that dogmatically, I have a problem with that because the text, in my opinion, doesn't really support the scenario that they're building. Mm-hmm. Let's build scenarios, but let's not start with the current events and read it back into the Bible. Let's not say Damascus is significant because I just picked up my newspaper and I saw, Turkey and Iran and Russia in Damascus. As my professor, Charlie Dyer, used to say, it's okay to start with current events, or it's okay to look at current events, but start with the Bible first. Do your hard Bible study, do your exegesis, and then secondarily look at current events and see if current events match what the Bible says. And I think with this Damascus prophecy, they're going the wrong direction, because I don't think Isaiah 17 really supports what it is they're saying. So anyway, I just wanted to toss that in for what it's worth.
I really appreciate that. I remember reading a book by Dyer on Babylon. And I think it was called The Tale of Two Cities. Does that sound right?
Sounds good. Sounds about right.
And he really convinced me that Babylon will be rebuilt. And I look at it and I think, okay, which is another subject for probably another time, but fascinating. Okay, Psalm 83, and then I've really got to get to Ezekiel 38, because your take on Ezekiel 38 and 39, I think we got to put them both together in the understanding of what you're about ready to say for people. And you have to, because usually when you hear somebody talk about that battle, they stop. They only go to Ezekiel 38 and Russia coming against Israel. Hardly anybody ever takes it to the next chapter. So we're going to go to the next chapter because you have a different take on it than almost everybody does. But first, Psalm 83. So Psalm 83 also, do you believe it was a war? Do you believe it was a prayer, Psalm 83, or both?
Yeah, well, where people are very disappointed with my view on it is I don't think Psalm 83 is a prediction. And there's no war. Read through it. You'll see there's no war. The only thing that's happening in Psalm 83 is Asaph is praying, it's like what we call an imprecatory prayer, where a man of God prays for judgment on God's enemies. That's all that's happening in Psalm 83. And I don't think it's correct to turn that into an actual prediction, because people get into this debate, was this fulfilled in 1948, or is this something for later? Or is it concurrent with Ezekiel 38 and 39? And I'm at the beginning saying, well, let's not even get into that, because it's not even a prediction or a prophecy. I mean, the Ezekiel 38 and 39 clearly is a prophecy, because it keeps saying in that day, and it talks about, as you just mentioned, 7 months to bury the dead, 7 years to, burn the weapons. Daniel 11, is clearly a prophecy, because it says things like at that time, and it describes actual conflicts. But as you look at it, you don't see any of that language, in Psalm 83. And I realize he's talking about specific nations there, but all of those nations were in existence in 950 BC when Asaph prayed that. And all Asaph is doing there is saying, these are the perennial enemies of Israel. And I just hope, Lord, at your time, you sock it to them, and your judgment will come on them. He's not making a prediction about a war. And that's what you call an imprecatory prayer. And there's lots of these in the Psalms. Psalm 2. I mean, if you're going to make a Psalm 83 an independent war, then we have to have a Psalm 2 war. So does the Psalm 2 war happen before the Psalm 83 war? And then the Ezekiel 38 and 39 battle happens, and it gets very confusing. So I know that's disappointing to a lot of people, because my view won't sell many books. Nobody wants to hear about an imprecatory prayer. That's boring, but that's my take on it.
Well, I do believe, with my friends and colleagues that promote Psalm 83 war, they have a fulfillment of Israel getting the land that God had allotted to them way back in the days of Abraham and then Joshua, and you start following the whole land covenant. So I don't believe that Israel's going to have the land that God had given them until the millennial kingdom. Mm-hmm. At that point, no doubt, they will have it. Jesus comes back, he rules and reigns from Jerusalem, and they will have it at that point. So, there are some disagreements on that, and I tend to think along the lines more that you do. I do know that some people say Psalm 83 was a battle that was fulfilled in 1948. I don't see it that way. So, thank you. Okay.
Well, real quick, once again, they've got a scenario. First, there's going to be this Psalm 83 war, which increases Israel's land. And then secondarily, that's going to create jealousy, which is going to lead to the Gog Magog invasion. And it's what they're doing with Psalm 83 is exactly what they're doing with Damascus in Isaiah 17. They're building a 2-part scenario, which is all very fascinating and interesting, but I think they're going the wrong direction. A scenario is only good as the text it comes from. So let's start with the text and see if these things are really taught in the text, and let's develop our scenarios secondarily.
Yeah. Great. Well, I want to move on to Ezekiel 38 and 39.
Sure.
Because you look now, and there's a lot of people are interested in what's going on right now, because we saw the meeting just, a week or two ago with Putin and Erdogan and the leader over in Iran. They met in Tehran, I believe. So we see these 3 big players. Do you believe that the areas that are mentioned in the book of Ezekiel, the northern territories, represent Turkey, Iran, and Russia?
Yeah, I believe that.
Okay. And then with that, now we're looking at this alliances forming. We see what's going on in Europe. We see what's going on with Ukraine. We're dealing with all these different issues with energy throughout the whole world. And we kind of see Russia in the driver's seat in a sense. They're saying, okay, Germany, you're not having any more gas. In Germany, they're talking about taking cold showers. So we're watching this play out, yet this invasion to Israel comes, it appears, to take something that Israel has, plunder. Do you think it's energy, or walk us through your thoughts on that and what we see happening now as things are developing?
Well, when Russia invaded Ukraine, I got a number of emails, and I'm sure you got the same amount, asking the same question. People wanted to know, is this a fulfillment of Ezekiel 38? And my answer was, it is not a fulfillment of Ezekiel 38, because the Bible says Russia is going to invade Israel in the Middle East. Ukraine, is not in the Middle East. However, it is clearly, in my mind, stage setting in preparation for Ezekiel 38, just like a chessboard has to be taken out of the game box and the pieces arranged properly for a chess match. In the same way, God is setting up the world for the fulfillment of his word, because you have a very aggressive, expansionistic Russia that just invaded a country. And B, the last time I looked at a map, Ukraine is actually between Russia up north and Israel. So they're not moving the opposite direction. They're moving in the direction of Israel. And so a number of other things that we could cite, quite clearly, the stage is being set. Now, that doesn't make me a date setter, because I don't know how long the stage setting is going to keep going and how sharper the focus, is going to become. But there's no doubt in my mind that the things happening today, you mentioned the meeting of the big three in Tehran concerning Syria. That's another stage setting event. I mean, those three nations have to be hostile towards Israel, and they have to cooperate with each other. And you're right that what furnishes the motive for this attack is wealth. And it says it there, I think, in verse 12 and verse 13. In fact, if you look at it carefully, it says silver and gold. And, I've talked in the past, as you have, I'm sure, about natural gas discovered on Israel's northern coastline in the Mediterranean. We've talked about $5 trillion of mineral deposits in the Dead Sea. We've talked about oil in Zion, potential oil discoveries or existing oil discoveries in Israel. I think all of that is true, but look at it very carefully. It says silver and gold. Now think about this for a minute. When you study the Solomonic Empire, Solomon reigned from about 971 to 931, and there's gold everywhere. And track the gold that actually went with Israel into the Babylonian captivity. And then as Israel returned from the Babylonian captivity, you see all this itemized in, those genealogies in Ezra and Nehemiah. And it is a very small pittance in comparison to all of the gold that Solomon had. And so the question becomes, what happened to all that gold that Solomon had? Well, conjecture, it was hidden. Why did he hide it? Why did the Israelis hide it prior to the Babylonian captivity? Because they didn't want Nebuchadnezzar, to get his hands on it. And in fact, the conjecture is they hid it so well that they forgot where it was. Subsequent generations, I'm talking about. So is it too far-fetched to say Israel is on the precipice of a major gold discovery? In our pastor's points of view shows, I've read to our audience several different articles where a lot of the Jews, the Hebrews, think that they're on the precipice of a massive gold discovery. And could that be? It's kind of interesting. I saw an article where Russia wanted to be paid in gold. And that's the currency that they're moving towards. So, you asked me what is going to precipitate this invasion. Could it be? And I'm not going to start a new church over this or anything. But is it too far fetched to conclude that the Israelis are on the precipice of a massive gold discovery, and that's going to provoke the envy of the big three? My friend Bill Perkins at Compass Ministries International is the first one that kind of got me thinking along this way. And so maybe the gold and silver is a lot more literal than we originally thought. Maybe it's not just, natural gas or oil or mineral deposits. Maybe it's actual silver and gold like the Bible says. So there's something to think about.
That is cool. That's totally, you can really have my mind moving, because you also read in that same passage, if we're going to take this literal, you have horse and buckler. So the invasion, this invasion, they're descending like a cloud, but also they're all on their horses. So how is it? Is this boots on the ground invasion too? Is this what this implies? That something has happened that, I don't know, that causes a boots on ground invasion?
I got to confess to you, Bill.
Or Tom?
I'm sorry. Bill was Bill Perkins.
I knew who Bill was. I still remembered my name.
I'm sorry.
Oh, that's all right. That's all right. That's all right, Frank.
Well, I got to confess to you, Tom. I've been studying prophecy since the late 1980s, and I have completely and totally missed something. And it did not occur to me until my latest series that you mentioned that I'm doing in our Sunday school hour, entitled The Middle East Meltdown, where I'm teaching Ezekiel 36 through 39 verse by verse. And it says it over and over again, and it's like slapping my forehead. How in the world did I miss this? And what it says over and over again is, it doesn't just say the invasion will be into Israel. It says over and over again, the mountains of Israel. I mean, it says that over and over and over again. Now, Donald Trump gave back to Israel the Golan Heights. He allowed them to annex the Golan Heights, which is a northern area up on northern Israel, separating Israel from Syria. And it's a mountainous area. And so I thought to myself, well, my goodness, there's the Lord again setting the stage for the fulfillment of this prophecy, because the prophecy is they're going to come from the far north and they're going to hit the mountains. Well, guess what? Now there's mountains in Israel thanks to this annexation. For the specifics of this prophecy to be fulfilled, the second question is, well, how do you navigate mountains? You can't do it with tanks or, normal ways of travel. You got to be on horseback. And I was interested to discover that our own CIA, back in some of the Middle Eastern conflicts that we've had, actually brought in horses, from Tennessee. So when it says horses, I guess I'm of the persuasion that it actually means horses. And it seems to me that the mountainous region there, the Golan Heights, which thanks to Trump is now within the borders of Israel, that creates the scenario, whereby there will actually be horses involved in this invasion. And I think what's going to happen at the end of the day, Tom, is all of this stuff is going to be fulfilled a lot more literally than most of us have anticipated, right down to the gold and silver.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because when Trump did that with the Golan Heights, I believe that that was also necessary because of the same passage. These are the mountains of Israel. They're not mountains of the UN. They're not mountains of the occupied territory. No, these are the mountains of Israel, and I felt the same thing. And there's also, I think it's in chapter 38, verse 7, where Magog, with their leader Gog, is a guard for the troops. And I believe that's literal. And then when you look at that and you look at what is Russia doing in the area of Syria. They are literally being a guard for these troops. So if all these other passages in Ezekiel 38 appear to be literal, well, that would include a horse and buckler, and it would also include silver and gold. And I never knew that about the silver. I never thought that about the silver and gold till you brought it up. To the point where I'm so fascinated with it, I can't wait till we're done with this program. I'm going to start checking that stuff out. And I'm going to have some of my friends say, hey, start looking for some gold over there in Israel. But what's interesting is we see this shift taking place, major shift taking place with currency. And we can tell it's eventually going to go to some type of electronic currency. We know it needs to for the fulfillment of Revelation 13. But at the same time, we also see nations like Russia saying, we want the gold. And that's just so cool. I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, now we got to go to questions. So, but before we go to questions, I have so many more things I want to ask you, but Ezekiel 38, the battle, listen everybody, as Dr. Wood starts to answer this, send in your questions, but put the word question in all caps so I can see it as easy as possible. We'll get to as many as we possibly can. But right now, I'm going to ask Dr. Andy Woods to describe the timing of Ezekiel 38 and 39 in his perspective. So take it from there. I've heard your whole message on these things, but,
Just in a nutshell, the biggest difference that I have with other views is I don't think these chapters are simultaneous. I think they're describing a process. That's no shock because chapter 36, first they're going to be brought into their land, then they're going to be sprinkled with the Holy Spirit. That doesn't happen in 24 hours. That's a long process that we're seeing happen now. 37, where the bones form the skeleton, and then Ezekiel sees there's no breath in the skeleton of the body, so he prophesies again, and the breath or the Holy Spirit enters the body. That's a process. That doesn't happen in 24 hours. So since a process is normal in the rest of the context of these chapters, I'm seeing a process in chapters 38 and 39. And I think what's happening in chapters 38 and 39 is it's bracketing the outer edges of the tribulation. So chapter 38 is a description of this invasion during a time of peace. And I put that in the tribulation because it says in verses 18 and 19 that this is during the time of God's blazing wrath. So the only time God's wrath is going to be poured out is in the yet future, is on earth, that is in the tribulation. So there's a trajectory from peace to war in chapter 38. And that's exactly what we find in Seal Judgment 1 and Seal Judgment number 2. Seal Judgment number 1, the rider on the white horse. Seal Judgment number 2, war. And so I'm putting chapter 38 at the beginning of the tribulation in Seal Judgment number 2. And then Ezekiel describes the end of the process. He flashes forward. He leapfrogs the whole tribulation period. So if you want to read about the desecration of the temple and the mark of the beast and the destruction of Babylon, you're not going to find it in Ezekiel 38 and 39 because Ezekiel is just giving you the outer edges. He's not even going to tell you about Armageddon. If you want to read about Armageddon, you got to read Revelation 16 and other places. He's leapfrogging in chapter 39 to the very, very end, the end results, which is a converted Israel. Chapter 39, verses 22 and 29. Chapter 39, verses 22 and 29, clearly an end of the tribulation event. And he's describing the birds of prey, feasting on the carnage of all of the deceased that Jesus has killed when he comes back. Clearly an end of tribulation passage. And from there, he dovetails right into the millennial kingdom. So the big question is, well, where do you put the burying of the dead and the 7 years burning of the weapons? Well, that goes right into the millennial kingdom, which is not a problem because those are memorials. Babylon, Revelation 19, 2 and 3 is going to be burning during the millennial kingdom. So what's wrong with having some weapons burned during the millennial kingdom? We know there's going to be animal sacrifices in the temple, Ezekiel 40 through 48, and that's a memorial. So the 7-month burying of the dead and the 7 years burning of the weapons, that's memorials, that are taking place in the millennial kingdom as well. Remember, the millennial kingdom is just a renovation. It's not a brand new creation, as will be the eternal state. In fact, there's even going to be death amongst some mortals during the millennial kingdom, Isaiah 65, verse 20. So if that's what the millennial kingdom is like, I don't have any problem with 7 months to bury the dead, 7 years to burn weapons. And so I'm seeing chapter 38, beginning of the tribulation, chapter 39, the end of the tribulation, the discussion of the burying of the dead and the burning of weapons is a really nice transition into Ezekiel 40 through 48, which is millennial also. Mm-hmm. And part of the millennium will be burying dead, and it will be burning weapons as a memorial, glorifying God to what he has done. So that's my basic take on it. I should say, like most of ideas I have, they're not original with me completely. This one comes from the late Dr. Harold Honer, who was my professor at Dallas Seminary. He explained his view one day in class, and I just said, that's it. He's got it, because he's seeing it as a process. Everybody else, in their view, is seeing both chapters happening concurrently or simultaneously. So I hope I didn't confuse everybody.
I get what you're saying, but I do have the one problem with it is if the Ezekiel 38 battle happens in the beginning, which I place it there about the same time, the rider on the red horse, right in that time frame. Well, if the victory that God describes in chapter 39 doesn't come till the end of the tribulation, 7 years later, then what's going on after that Russian invasion for those 7 years during that time frame?
Well, I would say to answer that, you have to consult other passages, because prophecy, it's like a jigsaw puzzle. You're putting together pieces, and Ezekiel gives you 2 big pieces. Mm-hmm. And then God says, okay, now consult other parts of my word to figure out what's happening in the interim.
There's a lot going on in the interim.
Oh, yeah. And you get into the seals, the trumpets, the bowls, the mark of the beast. And that's what makes this so exciting to do, because, poor Ezekiel didn't even know, he didn't have all the pieces in his box. God just gave him 2. And here we are with a completed canon, and we have all the pieces. And it's up to systematic theologians like yourself and myself to organize it and try to put it together. And when you do that, you'll start to see a beautiful mosaic.
It is a lot of fun to put these pieces together. I've told friends that when you look at these Old Testament prophecies, the book of Revelation compiles many of them into one book. How does this fit and how does that fit? And much of that work has already been done for us in the book of Revelation, if you actually believe that the prophecies are literal, which I do. I'm not a replacement theologist, nor am I a post-millennial or amillennial for that matter. Okay, here's a question. You pretty much already answered this, but Ezekiel, this is from the least of these, Ezekiel 39, verse 25. Can you explain it for everybody watching? This is what Ezekiel 39, verse 25 says. It's right there in the passage that Andy was talking about. This is what the Lord God of heaven says. Now I will bring back the captives of Jacob, have mercy on the whole house of Israel. I will be jealous for my holy name, which is really Well, you were saying this is at the end of the tribulation period, when the Lord returns and He's not going to hide His face from Israel anymore. All of that is taking place.
Yeah, when you get outside of Ezekiel 36 and 37, you see there's a twofold regathering. First she's brought back in unbelief, the valley of the dry bones. Then secondarily, the Holy Spirit enters her. And so since we're the generation that's seeing the restoration of Israel to her land in unbelief, we ask a question, okay, what's the tool that God is going to use to bring His unbelieving nation to faith? And the answer is in chapters 38 and 39. He's going to bring this tremendous horde against them where they have no one to trust in but God. And so the end result of this whole thing, verse 25, verse 22, verse 29 of chapter 39 is a believing Israel. And that has to be an end of tribulation event, because once Israel is in faith, Matthew 23 verses 37 through 39, they will literally call Jesus back to the earth and He will rescue them. And so you can't have a second advent, which is at the end of the tribulation, unless you have a converted Israel. And so that's why that's described there. And chapters 38 and 39 is the tool that God is going to use to bring His unbelieving nation to faith. Because we know that has to happen at some point. Chapter 36 tells us, and chapter 37 tells us, what's the tool God's going to use? He's going to use the Gog Magog invasion.
Oh. Yeah, I love that answer. Here's a question that really, you just answered it, but I love that this person asked it because he has connected this. Paul Favada says, does Pastor Andy then equate or align Ezekiel 39:29 with Zechariah chapter 12, verse 10, which you just do? And he asked this before you said all that. So I thought that was really cool. It shows he's thinking. That's totally cool. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to ask you about the Abraham Accords. Your thoughts on it. I know different thoughts from different people. Is it good for Israel?
Well, I think, it's frustrating because how do you answer that? Do you put your political hat on or do you put your prophetic hat on? I'm just going to put my prophetic hat on for a second and just leave the politics out of it. When you look at verse 12, verse 13 right in there, it talks about some folks of chapter 38 that won't like the invasion. Now, who are they? Sheba and Dedan, which we think is Saudi Arabia. And then it says not Tarshish. I used to think it said Tarshish, but it doesn't say that. It says the merchants of Tarshish, the money men of Tarshish. And we know where Tarshish is. That's Spain. So what are these Abraham Accords about? They're basically, as I understand them, normalization agreements where they enter into these agreements with these nations. They're not even so much peace agreements as these nations were never at war with Israel, like Egypt and Jordan were. But they're basically agreements where they say, okay, Israel says you have to recognize our right to exist. And if you recognize our right to exist, we're going to give you trade, tourism, technology, and travel, the 4 T's. So those agreements prosper Israel, and they prosper Saudi Arabia, and they prosper the merchants of Tarshish. So with that being said, who is the latest nation that's supposed to enter into one of these Abraham Accords? We've already had some UAE and other, Bahrain and groups like that, nations like that, enter into the Abraham Accords. Everybody says Saudi Arabia is the next one to go. So now Saudi Arabia is prospering because of Israel. So now you suddenly have an explanation why Sheba and Dedan are protesting. They don't like it when the big three come against Israel because they have a normalization agreement with Israel and they're prospering. Now, the other one that complains, it's in verse 13, is the merchants of Tarshish. And the last time I checked, the very last nation to enter into the Abraham Accords with Israel was Morocco. Now, just look at a map. Yeah. You go to Morocco and you just go due north, and you right away you hit Spain. So Spain is in a trading relationship with Morocco. Morocco is prospering because of the Abraham Accords. And suddenly it makes sense why the merchants of Tarshish, the money men of Spain, will not like this invasion. Because Morocco's prospering, they're prospering, they speak up. Sheba and Dedan or Saudi Arabia don't like it, they speak up. And to my mind, that's the significance of the Abraham Accords, is they've now given us a scenario where we can now understand why the merchants of Tarshish and Saudi Arabia don't like the invasion and speak up against it.
I think that's just a terrific analysis of what's going on there. Do you think the Abraham Accords could turn into the covenant with many of Daniel chapter 9?
Oh, yeah, because, when Israel enters into this peace treaty with the Antichrist, she has to have a psychology in place where she's entering into all these treaties. And Israel has that.
And there's many. There's been many.
She's got a treaty with, I think, Egypt, right? Mm-hmm. A peace treaty. I think she entered into her peace treaty with Jordan in 1994. And now she's entering into these normalization agreements. And Israel has the psychology of let's make a deal. And that's exactly what Daniel said she would be like on the eve of the Antichrist. So the Antichrist, as far as I can tell, is going to have a treaty structure already in place. I'm not sure how you interpret Daniel 9:27, but it says there in the English translation, he will confirm a treaty. I think the Hebrew there is Giborim, which means to strengthen. I mean, you can't strengthen something unless it already exists.
Yeah.
So look at all these treaties that are coming into existence, whether they're peace treaties or normalization agreements. It's like the Antichrist is going to show up and just flick on the switch. The treaty infrastructure is already in place.
They were going to make this work.
Yeah. So to answer your question, yes.
Yeah, that's the same way I see this also. Do you see any importance or significance in the upcoming Tish B'Av?
Help me with that. That's
so Tish B'Av is the anniversary of the destruction of the first and second temple coming up here in just a few days, and if I think a lot of Jews are on the edge. Pete Garcia has, listed all kinds of things that have happened that have been significant on Tish B'Av regarding the nation of Israel or the Jewish people or close to it, but I don't know. It's kind of hard. For me, I have a hard time saying, yes, this Tish B'Av. I mean, it's interesting to me that certain events have taken place in Israel's history over Tish B'Av. But
that's the month of Av, right? If I'm okay.
Yes. So 9th, Tishbe 9. Yes, 9th of Av.
Let me tell you something really interesting that I discovered when I was working on my dissertation. I found and I'd have to track down where I got this. I think it's in the Talmud or the Mishnah, somewhere in there. And I think Josephus mentions it. And maybe you already know this, but the first time I discovered it, I couldn't believe it, that according to Jewish tradition, the temple was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar on 586 BC on the exact same day. The exact same, not even the same month, the same day that Titus of Rome destroyed the temple in AD 70. And I saw that just sent chills up and down my spine, because it shows, if that tradition is true, I don't know why it wouldn't be, that God deals with complete numbers. And so if something really major happened prophetically at some point on that 9th of Ab, it wouldn't surprise me in the least.
So Pete Garcia, who had him on yesterday, he just wrote an article about that based on another article, probably one of your colleagues, that he read, and it was really fascinating. And Pete did not, he wasn't date setting. He says this 9th of Av, the rapture is going to take place, but he said, he just brought up this point that Tish B'Av is so significant in the mind of any Jew. You know, the first temple and the second temple. He goes, just get a, and you know, Pete's sharp, so he puts everything out there. He fills in every blank, and he said, just imagine what would get Israel's attention. You know, the rapture takes, I'm just saying, what if the rapture takes place on Tish B'Av? And he goes, the significance in the mindset, the psyche of Jews worldwide would I mean, it would have people's attention. So that was very fascinating as Pete was laying that out yesterday.
Yeah, I would say that while as interesting as that is, I think prophetically we know what's going to get their attention. It's going to be the desecration of the temple.
Oh, that'll definitely do it. Yeah. Because
once that happens, that will recapitulate what Antiochus Epiphanes did about 167 BC. I mean, Hanukkah itself comes out of that time period. And once the man that they think is their Messiah, you know, breaks the deal with them and recapitulates what one of their villains in history did, Antiochus Epiphanes, that's going to get their attention. The guy that led me to Christ said, you know, God knocks us down so that we look up. We all can relate to that, I think.
Amen.
But there's a national knocking down coming for Israel, and I think it'll be that desecration of the temple.
Yeah. And it's just been great having you with me today. I wish we had more time. I have enough time for one more question. I know it's going to take a couple more minutes to answer the question. It's come up in here several times, and this person said something about, can you do a program, which we won't do a whole program on it right now. You've probably actually done this. When will you do a show on the Sons of God debate, line of Seth, etc.? I'm going to throw it out there like this. You've done it before, but the Nephilim, your take on it. And before you do that, this Sunday night, you're going to go into some detail on some of the things we talked about today. So people can find you on your YouTube channel. The description is herein. How can people find you, Andy, for people who aren't watching the description?
You know, you can go to the Sugarland Bible Church website, www.slbc.org. We've got all of our stuff archived there, as well as live streaming. We live stream on that website every Sunday morning, every Wednesday night, although we're taking the summer off with Wednesday, but that'll kick up again in September. And we also live stream on the Sugarland Bible Church Facebook page. And probably the most popular way people like to track me down and see what I'm doing is my YouTube channel. Just type in Andy Woods Ministries into the YouTube search engine, and it'll take you right there. Like you, Tom, I got myself in a little trouble with the powers that be there on YouTube with the issue you're asking about, the sons of God and the daughters of men. Because I say some things in there related to current events that they didn't like, but you can get the unedited version. First of all, at your conference next week, I'll talk about it, but beyond that, my Rumble channel is unedited. So just type in Andy Woods Ministries into your Rumble search engine and you can get it that way.
This is great. And of course, Billy Crone has gotten himself in trouble with the same powers that be, and so is Brandon. They'll both be at the conference next week. And listen, everyone, I encourage you, if you want to check it out, the live stream for the conference. It's only $14.99. 30 days you get to watch it 24/7 whenever you want, and it'll be uncensored, as Andy has said.
Do I got a couple seconds to answer the sons of God? I never did
Yes, I was just going to say, let's go there right now.
Yeah, well, the Hebrew there is B'nai Elohim, which is only used 5 times in the Bible. Twice in Genesis 6. The only other time it's used is in the book of Job. And keep in mind that Job is the oldest book. It's the only book on the record before Moses, wrote Genesis. And so there's very little doubt in my mind that when Moses uses the expression sons of God, B'nai Elohim, he's talking about angels. And in this case, he's talking about fallen angels procreating with human women to create a hybrid race of people that aren't fully human because their genetics have been tampered with. And that's who the Nephilim are. The Hebrew verb for Nephilim is a plural noun, but it comes from the root in a fall, a verb which means to fall. And so the Nephilim literally are the fallen ones. And so Satan is trying to lock the human race into a permanent state of fallenness by creating a race of people that can never begat Jesus. Because going back to Genesis 3, verse 15, the Messiah has to be fully God and fully man. He's from the seed of the woman. And what better way to stop that prophecy from happening than to create a race of people that aren't fully human? The Messiah can never come, and Satan continues on as perpetual ruler, of the world. And that's why it talks about how Noah was perfect in his generations. Righteous and perfect and righteous, it says around Genesis 6, around verse 11. And track down that second word in Hebrew, and you'll see that it's used of the Passover lamb in Exodus 12, verse 5, which had to be genetically perfect. So Noah and his family were preserved in the ark because they were uncontaminated by this genetic experiment that Satan was running. And consequently, Noah's lineage, Shem, was qualified to bring forth the Messiah. And so Satan does a lot of different things throughout the Old Testament to prevent the birth of Christ. But this was his ultimate project, where he tried to tamper with the gene pool of the human race to create the Nephilim, so that the Messiah can never be born. And God basically, because this was so out of bounds, the fallen angels left their natural abode to do this. God shut the whole thing down through the flood. And that's why when you get into 1 Peter, 2 Peter, and Jude, it talks about some of the angels in incarceration, and it always connects it with the days of Noah. And if you don't have this explanation from Genesis 6, you have no explanation as to why some fallen angels are free, because we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and rulers of this dark world, and why some fallen angels are incarcerated. Some of them are incarcerated because they were involved in this, genetic experiment in Genesis 6. And what's interesting is the view that I'm giving, the angel view, was the traditional view of Judaism, and it was the traditional view of the early church. And the idea that this is just the intermarrying of the lines of Seth and Cain, that view doesn't even come about until the 4th century AD. So that's kind of a Johnny-come-lately view. And by the way, Genesis 6 doesn't say Seth and Cain. Moses knows how to say Seth and Cain. He's said it a number of times in the earlier chapters. Here he uses a totally new expression, sons of God, B'nai Elohim. And the only book that uses that expression is Job. That's the only book on the record at that point when Moses writes it. And so that's why I think, the sons of God there were fallen angels, and the whole agenda is to stop the birth of Jesus. That, by the way, is why 1 Peter around chapter 3, verses 18 and following, says Jesus, in between his crucifixion and resurrection, descended to where those fallen angels are incarcerated. It says spirits, and spirits is only used of angels. And he preached to them. The verb there is not evangelism, euangelizo, it's caruso. He proclaimed to them. What did he say to them? He told them, I think that they lost. They're on the losing side of history. The Messiah was born, and he did accomplish his mission through his death, burial, resurrection, and ascension. And so this is, you can't put these pieces of the puzzle together unless you have the doctrine of fallen angels in Genesis 6.
Wow, that was great, and in such a short time too, to be able to say all that. Terrific. You also caused me to think about a few other things which we can't get into now, but Revelation 14, when somebody receives the mark, there's no opportunity to repent, which is probably, I can imagine what happened with YouTube and different things. But Yuval Noah Harari, I mean, some of the things you're talking about, the stuff he says, man, this could be fascinating. I can't wait to see you next week. Okay, again, what are the two messages we talked about that you're going to do?
Yeah, well, real quick, if people want to get my Sons of God stuff, I have an angelology series on the Sugarland Bible Church website. Just go to the last 4 lessons in the series, and you can get the lengthy explanation of what I just said, there in Reader's Digest form. But the two messages I think I'll do next week, Tom, are the days of Noah, and I'll also do the coming kingdom.
This could be great. I can't wait.
Yeah.
So you heard it, everybody. So now it's official. And it was really terrific having you on today. I wish I had you on a little bit more often than once every 6 months, but it's wonderful. I miss you. Can't wait to see you next week. And we'll be praying for your safe travels too.
Awesome, Tom.
All right.
Thanks.
Tell
Looking
Ann
forward to
hi.
it.
All right. God bless.
God bless.
Bye, everybody. Hope you can join us in the live cast if you're unable to register for the in-person conference. God bless you all, and I'll be back soon. See ya.